Welcome to another story written by Oracle 1. The Doppelgängers of the Forgotten Carnival. Chapter 1. The carnival appeared at the edge of the marsh like a memory refusing to stay buried. Jonah Mercer stopped his car on the narrow service road and cut the engine. The headlights died, and with them went the only movement in the world. Fog pressed in from all sides, dense and low, swallowing the trees behind him and the road ahead until the car felt suspended in nothing. The air smelled of wet earth and rust, sharp enough to sting the inside of his nose. Ahead, crooked silhouettes rose from the mist. A Ferris wheel leaned at a dangerous angle, its skeletal spokes tangled with hanging streamers that fluttered without wind. Striped tent roofs sagged inward, fabric torn and stained dark by decades of rain. A carousel stood frozen mid-turn, its painted horses chipped and eyeless, their mouths locked in permanent, exaggerated smiles. No lights burned, no music played, and yet Jonah had never been more certain he was not alone. He stepped out of the car, boots sinking slightly into mud softened by the marsh. The fog muffled sound, turning even his own breathing into something distant and unfamiliar. Somewhere deeper within the carnival grounds, something creaked slowly, rhythmically, as if testing its joints after a long sleep. The Forgotten Carnival, locals called it, though most refused to call it anything at all. It had arrived decades ago without announcement, setting up on land that maps struggled to name. For 3 summers it operated, drawing crowds from surrounding towns with promises of attractions unlike any other. Then, on the final night, the carnival closed early. By morning, half the staff were gone. By the end of the week, so were several visitors. The investigation stalled. Records conflicted. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Some swore they had seen missing people days later, wandering town streets with vacant smiles, behaving almost correctly. Almost. Jonah adjusted the strap of his camera bag and stepped past the rusted gate. The metal sign above it hung crooked, letters flaking away until only faint impressions remained. As he crossed the threshold, the fog thinned just enough for him to see deeper into the grounds. The silence changed. It grew heavier, layered, as though it carried echoes that had nowhere left to go. He followed the main path, gravel crunching beneath his boots. Booths lined either side, ring toss stands with warped bottles, shooting galleries with targets permanently dented, concession counters stripped bare except for cracked glass and a single, upturned stool. The colors, once garish and inviting, had faded into sickly pastels that blended too easily with rot. Jonah raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash bloomed white, momentarily overpowering the fog. In that instant, he thought he saw movement near the carousel, someone stepping back just out of sight. When his vision cleared, the space was empty. He lowered the camera slowly, heart beating harder than it should have. He told himself it was an animal. A trick of light. Old places invited imagination, especially ones like this, steeped in rumor and unfinished stories. Still, his shoulders refused to relax. The carousel drew him closer without conscious decision. As he approached, details sharpened. The horses were carved from wood, their paint peeling to reveal grain beneath. Their eyes had been scratched out, not by time, but by something deliberate, deep gouges where faces should have gazed outward. One horse stood apart from the others. Its head was turned slightly, as if watching him. Jonah circled the platform. The music box housing sat open, its interior rusted and tangled with snapped wires. He reached out, then hesitated, a strange reluctance tightening his chest. The air around the carousel felt different, warmer, thick with a faint sweetness that reminded him of old perfume and damp fabric. Behind him, gravel shifted. He spun around. A man stood at the edge of the path. Jonah's first thought was relief. He hadn't realized how badly he wanted proof of another human presence. The man wore a faded jacket and stood with his hands at his sides, posture loose, head tilted slightly in a way that suggested curiosity. "Hey," Jonah called. His voice sounded wrong here, flattened by fog. "Didn't think anyone else came out this way." The man didn't respond. Jonah took a step closer. "Are you all right?" The man's face was familiar. Uncomfortably so. It took a moment for Jonah to understand why. The fog shifted, revealing features that matched his own: same dark hair, same narrow scar near the left eyebrow, same unevenness in the jaw where an old break had healed improperly. The man smiled. It was Jonah's smile, but it lingered too long, stretching just slightly wider than it should have, exposing too many teeth. Jonah stumbled back, pulse roaring in his ears. "This isn't funny," he said, though the words felt thin the moment they left his mouth. "Who are you?" The man's head tilted further, the movement stiff, imprecise. His eyes tracked Jonah perfectly, unblinking. Then he stepped forward. Jonah ran. He didn't look back as he tore down the path, breath burning in his lungs. The carnival blurred around him, tents looming, booths collapsing inward, shadows slipping between structures where nothing should have fit. His foot caught on something, and he barely kept himself upright. Behind him, footsteps followed. They matched his pace exactly. No matter how fast he ran, they never gained, never fell behind. The sound mirrored his own stride perfectly, each footfall landing where his had just been. Jonah ducked into a hall of mirrors, shoving aside a hanging tarp and plunging into darkness streaked with grime and fractured reflections. Inside, the air was stale and close. Mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces warped and clouded, bending his image into grotesque shapes. His reflection multiplied endlessly, stretching and compressing with every step. Then the reflections began to change. Some lagged behind. Others moved ahead of him, anticipating motions he hadn't made yet. One reflection stopped walking entirely and turned to face him, smiling with that same stretched familiarity. Jonah backed away, heart hammering. The mirrors began to fill. Not with distortions, but with him. Dozens of Jonahs stared out from the glass, each one subtly wrong. Eyes too bright, smiles too fixed, heads tilted at unnatural angles, studying him with shared intent. From somewhere deeper in the hall, a voice spoke softly. It sounded exactly like his own. "You took too long," it said. The mirrors shuddered, and the carnival finally began to wake. Chapter 2. The mirrors trembled as one. Jonah staggered backward, his shoulder striking cold glass. Pain flared sharp and grounding, but it did nothing to quiet the rising panic clawing at his throat. The reflections rippled, surfaces warping as though something beneath them were pressing outward. The copies of his face smiled in unison, lips parting just enough to reveal teeth that looked too even, too clean. "You took too long," the voice repeated. It came from everywhere at once, behind the glass, above him, inside his own skull. Jonah clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound slipped through anyway, vibrating in his bones. "I don't know what you want," he said, the words shaking. "I don't belong here." Several reflections blinked out of sync. One of them frowned. A crack spider webbed across the mirror beside Jonah's head, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the enclosed space. He flinched, heart slamming against his ribs. The crack spread, branching outward, then another mirror fractured, and another, the hall filling with sharp, overlapping pops as glass failed under unseen pressure. Jonah bolted. He ran blind, hands outstretched, pushing past hanging curtains and narrow passages. Reflections flickered past him, too many arms, too many faces, until at last he burst through an exit flap and stumbled back into the open air. The fog had thinned, not dispersed, but drawn inward, coiling around the carnival structures like something alive. Lights flickered to life one by one along the midway. dim bulbs glowing sickly yellow, buzzing faintly. Somewhere, music crackled into existence, a distorted carnival tune dragging at the edges of memory. The carnival was no longer abandoned. It was performing. Jonah turned in a slow circle, chest heaving. Booths that had been empty now stood attended. Figures moved behind counters, their motions stiff and repetitive. A man rang a bell again and again with mechanical precision. A woman scooped popcorn into a paper bag that never filled, her smile frozen, eyes unfocused. Every face he saw was wrong. Not monstrous, not overtly inhuman, just off. Features sat slightly out of alignment. Movements lagged or repeated, like a broken recording, and threaded through all of it was a sickening sense of familiarity. He recognized them, people from town, from old photographs, from newspaper clippings he had studied before coming here. The missing. Jonah backed away, nausea rising. "No," he whispered. A hand settled on his shoulder. He screamed and spun, swinging wildly. His fist passed through empty air. No one stood behind him. Laughter drifted across the midway, soft and layered, echoing strangely. Jonah followed the sound despite himself, drawn toward the Ferris wheel looming at the carnival's edge. It was moving now. The wheel creaked as it turned, each car swaying gently. Inside them sat passengers, silhouettes slumped against metal bars, heads tilted at identical angles. As the wheel completed its slow rotation, Jonah saw faces illuminated briefly by the weak lights. Every single one of them was his. At different ages, younger, older, some bearing injuries he had not yet suffered. Some smiling, some screaming silently. The wheel ground to a halt. One car stopped directly in front of him, door swinging open with a rusty whine. Inside sat a version of Jonah that looked almost right, same clothes, same camera bag slung over one shoulder. It met his gaze and spoke. "This is where we wait," it said calmly. "Until there's room." Jonah stumbled back, shaking his head violently. "I'm not you," he said. "You're not real." The other Jonah's smile faded. For the first time, something like irritation crossed its face. "We're as real as you are," it replied. "More, sometimes. We stay." The lights brightened. All across the carnival, figures turned toward Jonah in perfect unison. Conversation ceased. Games stopped mid-motion. Every eye fixed on him with shared focus. The pressure returned, subtle but insistent, nudging him forward, guiding his steps. Jonah resisted, digging his heels into the dirt, but the ground beneath him softened, pulling him along like wet clay. He found himself before the big top. The main tent towered overhead, canvas-patched and sagging, its stripes faded into dull red and yellow. The entrance yawned open, darkness swallowing the interior. From within came the low murmur of voices layered atop one another, identical in tone. His voice. Jonah's hands trembled as he pushed the flap aside. Inside, rows of seats stretched out around a central ring. The air smelled of dust, old sweat, and something coppery beneath it all. The seats were filled. Every occupant was him. Hundreds of Jonahs stared down at the ring, faces expectant, posture attentive. Some clutched programs. Others leaned forward eagerly. A few turned in their seats to watch him enter, their expressions sharp with interest. At the center of the ring stood a single mirror. Taller than any Jonah, framed in tarnished gold, its surface dark and opaque. It hummed faintly, resonating with the same frequency Jonah had felt in the asylum's ledger years ago. A vibration that bypassed skin and settled directly in thought. A spotlight flickered on. Jonah stood alone in its harsh glow. From the front row, a Jonah rose. Then another. Then another. They descended into the ring, forming a loose circle around him. Their movements were smoother than before, more confident, as though the carnival itself were lending them structure. You don't remember your first visit, one of them said gently. Jonah frowned. I've never been here. Several copies exchanged knowing looks. You tell yourself that every time, another said. The mirror rippled. Images bloomed across its surface. Jonah standing at the carnival gates years ago, younger, wide-eyed. Jonah walking the midway with fascination. Jonah entering the hall of mirrors, reaching out, curious rather than afraid. Jonah's breath caught. The memories felt foreign, but not false. They settled into place with terrifying ease. We don't replace you, Jonah said, stepping closer. We continue you. The copies closed in. His hands, gripped his arms. The touch was cold, precise. Jonah struggled, but the strength holding him was perfectly matched to his own. Every movement he made was anticipated, countered before it could fully form. The mirror brightened. Jonah felt himself pulled forward, the sensation eerily familiar, like déjà vu stretched into physical force. His reflection surfaced in the glass, then multiplied, layers of himself peeling away, each one stepping back into the crowd. No, he whispered, voice breaking. Please. The carnival lights dimmed, the music swelled, and the mirror opened. Chapter 3. The mirror did not shatter. It softened. Jonah felt the resistance vanish all at once, as though the glass had exhaled and given way. His body pitched forward, not falling but sliding, drawn into the dark surface with terrifying gentleness. Cold spread across his skin, then through it, seeping into muscle and bone until sensation dulled into something distant and abstract. Sound followed last. The carnival's music stretched and warped, notes elongating into a low, droning hum that vibrated through him as the world inverted. Light collapsed inward, folding until there was nothing left but depth, layer upon layer of shadow, threaded with faint reflections that watched him pass. Then he was standing. The ground beneath his feet was solid again, packed dirt damp with age. The smell of popcorn and rust hung thick in the air. Jonah looked around slowly, heart pounding, disoriented but intact. He was back at the edge of the carnival. The fog lay low across the marsh. The Ferris wheel stood motionless. The tents sagged and slept. Everything looked exactly as it had when he first arrived. Except for one thing. He wasn't alone. Someone stood a few feet away, facing the carnival gates. A man with dark hair, a familiar jacket, a camera bag slung over one shoulder. Jonah's breath caught. The man turned. It was him. Not distorted. Not exaggerated. Perfect. Every line of his face, every scar, every small asymmetry mirrored flawlessly. The man blinked, took in Jonah's expression, and smiled with unmistakable relief. Thank God, the man said. I thought I was the only one here. Jonah staggered back. No, he whispered. No, no. The other Jonah frowned, concern knitting his brow in a way that felt rehearsed. Are you all right? He asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. The words landed with crushing weight. Jonah's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His thoughts tangled, slipping away the harder he tried to grasp them. The memory of the mirrors, the crowd, the tent. Already they felt distant, unreal, like fragments of a dream dissolving on waking. The other Jonah stepped closer. Easy, he said gently. Hey, take a breath. His voice was warm, steady, trustworthy. Jonah felt his resistance weakening, panic blunted by a creeping numbness. The carnival behind the man remained silent, inert, abandoned. A forgotten place. Did you just get here? The other Jonah asked. Jonah searched his own mind for certainty and found only fog. He remembered driving, parking, seeing the gates. Everything after that blurred and stretched, images refusing to align. I think so, Jonah said finally. Relief washed over the other Jonah's face. Same, he said. I've been documenting old sites. Urban decay, lost attractions. This place. He glanced back at the carnival, eyes alight with fascination. It's incredible. Creepy, sure, but there's something about it. Jonah followed his gaze. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw movement between the tents. A flicker of light, a face that looked away too quickly. Then it was gone. We should go together, the other Jonah said. Strength in numbers, right? Jonah hesitated. Something deep within him recoiled, a final ember of warning flaring weakly in his chest. He looked at the man's smile, at the easy familiarity of it, and felt a hollow echo where fear should have been. Yeah, Jonah said slowly. Together, they walked side by side toward the gates. As they crossed the threshold, the air shifted. Jonah felt it like a soft click behind his eyes, subtle and final. The fog thinned as they moved deeper into the grounds, revealing more detail, more color. The carnival stirred. Lights flickered on in sequence, dim bulbs glowing to life along the midway. Music crackled from hidden speakers, the melody warped but welcoming. Booths straightened, counters cleared, prizes reappeared as if summoned by memory. The other Jonah laughed quietly. Guess it's not as abandoned as we thought. Jonah smiled back. He did not notice how the sound matched others rising around them. Figures emerged from the shadows, patrons drifting between attractions, couples strolling hand in hand, children darting past with laughter that echoed too long. Their faces were familiar in a distant, uncomfortable way, but Jonah could not place why. They moved deeper into the carnival, passing the carousel as it began to turn on its own. Painted horses rose and fell, their blank eyes gleaming under restored lights. Jonah felt a tug of recognition there, a faint sense of déjà vu that slipped away before it could form into thought. Hey, the other Jonah said, pointing. Hall of Mirrors. The building stood ahead, its entrance freshly lit, glass panels gleaming invitingly. Jonah's pulse quickened, though he could not say why. A pressure built behind his eyes, not painful, just insistent. I don't think, he began. But his feet were already moving. Inside, reflections multiplied endlessly. Jonah watched himself stretch and bend across the glass, dozens of versions staring back. They all moved perfectly in sync now, smiles natural, expressions calm. Too calm. The other Jonah stepped beside him, studying the reflections with interest. Wild, isn't it? He said. Seeing yourself from every angle. Jonah leaned closer to the glass. For an instant, the reflections lagged. Just a fraction of a second. His stomach dropped. He pulled back, heart racing, clarity surging like cold water. Images flooded back, mirrors opening, hands grabbing, a circle of faces watching as he was pulled apart. No, he whispered. The reflections smiled. Not his smile. The other Jonah's hand closed around his wrist, grip firm and precise. It's all right, he said softly. You always get like this at first. Jonah struggled, panic roaring back to life, but his movements were anticipated perfectly. Every twist, every pull was matched and countered before it could take form. The mirrors darkened. Behind the glass, shapes pressed close. Faces identical to his own, eyes bright with attention. Jonah saw himself among them, countless versions watching with patient expectation. Let me go, he gasped. The other Jonah shook his head, expression almost apologetic. We can't, he said. There has to be one of us out there. The glass softened. Jonah felt himself being pulled forward again, awareness stretching, thinning. As his reflection peeled away from him, he saw the other Jonah step back, posture straightening, features settling into place. Becoming whole. The last thing Jonah saw before the mirror closed was his replacement lifting the camera, adjusting the focus, and turning toward the carnival with eager curiosity. The music swelled. The lights burned steady. Outside, the fog rolled back in, thick and quiet, reclaiming the edges of the grounds. The road beyond the marsh remained empty. By morning, the carnival would look abandoned once more. And somewhere between the mirrors, another Jonah would be waiting. For more stories, like and subscribe.